I chose for effect. I'm imagining an American reader, not a Lebanese or an immigrant reader, but someone who's American. And so I act, in a sense, as a translator. I'm showing my culture and sort of explaining it to the native culture. The immigrant is always exotic to the native and vice versa. The world you're coming to is very strange and new, and you are strange and new to the world you're coming into. And so in a way you have to translate different aspects of your experience so that people will be able to understand and enjoy it, actually, because the immigrant experience can be very funny. A lot of funny things can happen. It can be very humorous, it can be poignant, it can be very tragic. And I try to use that to gain effect in telling the story. Yes, food is one of the last things to go in the immigrant experience. First is probably language, culture. You lose eventually your family into the Americanization process. But food often remains, and you come back to it. When I first began teaching, I went to Springfield, Missouri for my first job, and I took with me a cookbook from the Ladies' Auxiliary of the St. Elias Church. When I was growing up, I ate only Arabic food, Lebanese food, and I didn't want it. I wanted American food. I wanted to assimilate. And I'd ask for hamburgers, and my mother would make lamb burgers. And my friends loved to come to our house to eat, but I wanted to go to their house. I wanted French fries. I didn't want, lemon chicken and pilaf. So when I left home, I realized that I missed those things. I missed those foods. And food speaks to us in a very elemental way. So it connects to our culture in a way that has to do with our smell, our taste, our sense of nourishment and love and being loved. And so I took this cookbook with me, and every weekend I made a different dish. I called my mother, and I'd read the recipe to her, and I wanted it to taste like hers, and she would say, no, we don't put lemon in that, we put garlic, and I would cross it out and change it. And that's how I learned to begin cooking Arabic food, which I now teach and demonstrate at a cooking store in a town where I live. The last words that my mother said to me had to do with cooking. I was going to the hospital to visit her. She was dying, and I brought her some spinach tartlets that she'd taught me how to make, and she tasted them for my sake. She really didn't have an appetite. And as I was leaving for the evening, I said goodbye and gave her a kiss, and I was leaving, and she said to me when I was at the door, "Next time, more lemon." And those were the last words that I heard from her. And it speaks to me on many different levels. And food is one of the things that the generations come back to. My children, raised on hamburgers and French fries, want to learn how to make their grandmother's food. And I also use that in the book. The book closes with Sam, the protagonist, who is showing his daughter how to make grape leaves. And he says, and one day they'll be her grape leaves. I do feel a detachment. Sam's is a coming-of-age story, and coming of age is a way of detaching. So is immigration. I see a similarity between the two, which is one of the reasons I made Sam's story a coming-of-age story. When you come of age, you grow up, and part of growing up is realizing life is not fair. You realize that there's certain needs that you need to attend to for yourself as well as for other people. You let things go, childish things. You become more grown up, you take on adult responsibilities. In a sense, the immigrant does the same thing. In the culture, you're a baby, you're bewildered, and you come to being savvy by giving up much of what, or also using. It's not a total loss, what immigration does to us. In a way, we change, but we also change where we go. We change America. We made the restaurants better. We add to our culture, to the general culture, but it isn't what it used to be, and nothing is ever what it used to be. I think that's kind of a romantic illusion that we go back to when we first came here. When we first came here, we spoke a kind of Arabic that was spoken in the 1940s. Immigrants coming in the 60s were puzzled by some of the words we used because we were still speaking the Arabic of our arrival. Lebanon went on. We went on. We don't go back to where we originally were. I think that's very much a romantic fantasy. Sam comes from a part of me that I think was afraid to let go and step out into that world. And he's hanging on in a little Syria that's disappearing like gangbusters. There's nobody left anymore from the old days. And eventually, he's going to have to move out into that world as well. And it's a sense his growing up and his assimilation into America. Well, I wanted to add a sense of the elemental, like food, dying, and what we do with the dead. Is an elemental question, and I like to add that in my fiction because I believe that it adds authority to a made-up story, which is what fiction is anyway. So where it came from was my father had been a bootlegger. He was born in 1888, and he'd been a bootlegger in the 20s in Chicago. Don't know if he was connected with Al Capone, but he had referenced me once to the Sabaro Brothers funeral home, which was the undertaker to the underworld in the 20s. And when I decided I wanted, excuse me, to use that in my story, I realized that I knew nothing about it and needed to find out. So I visited funeral homes. I knocked on the door and asked, can I come in and look around and interview you? And I had a tape recorder, and I went in and had a real good look. And it was very interesting to me. One of the images that remains with me was they took me into a preparation room where they had just finished a prep, and the smell was of a wet body. You know, someone had been washed there. You could tell just by the humidity of the room. It was, and then they told me about when I was listening to the tape afterward, when I'd interviewed one particular funeral director in Ames, Iowa, and he started telling me about clavicle and how if you get that wet, it's really going to make a huge stink. And I went, whoa, there we go, we'll use that. And so I made it a part of the plot, but I also wanted to have the aura of it, the elemental atmosphere that you know, I hope provides some authority to the book. But and also, this was funeral home in the 1970s, and so I got funeral texts, funeral director texts from the 70s, and that's where I got Jim Wilson, I don't know if they still use the Jim Wilson moniker now for a body in transit, but they did in the 70s, and my book takes place in the 70s, and that was good enough. And I liked using the idea of Tayyip changing his name from Bumishmush to Tayyip, and finally to Jim Wilson. And I like the resonance that would have for what happens with him and his life in America. I think that Mama, Sam's mother, undergoes a change herself. She has gone through a naturalization and has come into her own. We first see her as being very helpless, terrified at the American cowboy movies. The sounds of the cows scare her, the mooing. And then finally she becomes more and more accustomed to being in America and comes into her own much more. Sam is invested in seeing her helpless and having her helpless, because if she's helpless, then she needs him, and if she needs him, he must stay. He can't leave, of course. That big, frightening image of his mother with the refrigerator empty, but her refrigerator is never empty, and that's one of the things he realizes finally when he leaves home and goes on into the larger America. Leaving a mother is always a tearing away. It's painful, and he does go through that pain, but he had to. It's also a sense of the need for growing up. In the American culture, the newcomers are welcomed and encouraged to develop as women. And this is something that I think the culture that I grew up in has a lot to learn from and a lot of ways to go yet. But it is developing, and there are many Arab American writers who are women now. Almaz Abinader, Diana Abu Jaber, Naomi Shihab Nye. They're wonderful poets and writers, and they're translating the female Arabic experience in America to us, and well worth reading. Wonderful writers, all of them.